The invasion began at 4:17 a.m. That was the first mistake. The second mistake was choosing Central Texas. The third mistake was landing next to an army post. The aliens, who called themselves the Serekh Ascendancy, had spent nearly 40 years studying humanity from deep observation platforms and stealth probes. Their analysts believed they understood the species well enough to begin limited planetary reduction. Humans were politically divided, culturally loud, strategically inconsistent, and far too invested in comforts and civilian routines. Their militaries were dangerous, yes, but also bureaucratically heavy, vulnerable to confusion, and dependent on communications structure. The Serekh considered themselves above such weaknesses. They were elegant conquerors, fast, cold, disciplined. They favored decapitation strikes, hit command nodes, erase air defense, isolate regional forces, break morale, absorb the world before it understood the war had started. Their chosen landing site sat near a major army installation because the Ascendancy was confident enough to strike close to strength rather than avoid it. They intended to prove superiority immediately. Destroy the military hub, demonstrate dominance, and let the rest of Earth interpret the lesson. The alien landing craft came down before dawn in low cloud and dust, black wedges dropping into scrubland and training areas just outside the outer perimeter roads. Energy towers punched into the ground, shield walls rose, armored infantry spilled out in disciplined blocks. It should have been devastating. Instead, they landed during PT hours, maintenance prep, overnight duty turnover, and the precise moment when half the army was either already angry, not yet awake, or both. Which is to say, they landed into the worst possible mood. The first contact report. Specialist Trevor Boone was in the motor pool when the sky turned green. He had been awake since 3:30 because Staff Sergeant Morales believed that soldiers built character in darkness and diesel fumes. Boone personally believed Staff Sergeant Morales was a government-funded sleep deprivation experiment, but that opinion had never improved his life. The motor pool was already alive in the usual Army way, generators humming, fluorescents buzzing, someone in Bay 3 trying to start a truck that had not wanted to live since 2018. A lieutenant holding coffee and looking lost, an E7 yelling at a clipboard, 3 privates pretending to tighten something. And in the middle of it all, Staff Sergeant Morales stalking between vehicles like an angry jungle cat in OCP uniform. "Why?" Morales shouted at no one and everyone. "Is this Humvee still dead?" Private Lyle, elbow deep in the engine compartment, replied, "Respectfully, Sergeant, I think it has accepted death." "Then unaccept it." That was the exact moment the horizon flashed green. Everybody froze. The post sirens didn't sound immediately, which somehow made it worse. A corporal standing on the hood of a JLTV looked west and said, y'all seeing that?" "Yes," said everyone. A moment later, the vibration hit. Not sound, vibration. The sort that moved through concrete and boot soles and teeth. Then came the black shapes, descending over the low hills outside the training areas. Private Lyle slowly withdrew from the engine bay. "Sergeant?" Morales narrowed his eyes at the sky. Then he said the most Army thing possible under the circumstances. "Get the trucks running." Boone stared at him. "Sergeant, I think that's aliens." Morales turned. And? Boone had no answer. Because, and this would later come up in several debriefings, there is no regulation-approved response to an NCO who says "and" to extraterrestrial invasion. The Serekh assumed they had hit command paralysis. That was a reasonable guess. From orbit, the post showed all the signs of disorganization. Movement without pattern. Vehicles starting in multiple sectors. Personnel running in different directions. Radio spikes. Sudden assembly points. It looked like panic. It was not panic, and it was the U.S. Army waking up, which was far more confusing. One alien recon officer observed hundreds of humans moving quickly but seemingly without shared purpose. Some ran toward formation areas, some ran toward the motor pools, some ran carrying weapons, some ran carrying coffee. A group of them were standing in a parking lot yelling about keys. Another cluster was arguing with a gate barrier. A convoy of tactical vehicles started moving before half the drivers appeared fully dressed. A helicopter crew sprinted across the tarmac while one pilot was still holding a breakfast burrito. Nothing about it resembled elegant military mobilization. That gave the Serekh confidence. Primitive military culture often looked sloppy before collapse. The recon officer marked the human base as combat-capable but organizationally unstable. What he did not understand was that army instability was not a weakness. It was a fuel source. The first alien assault element moved on Gate 7. They expected light security, sleepy guards, and a quick breakthrough into the installation road network. What they found was a sergeant first class named Dennis Wilcox, 2 gate guards, 1 military police truck with a transmission issue, and 6 soldiers from Transportation Battalion who had been waiting on a dispatch roster update for 4 hours and were therefore already in a state of transcendent hostility. When the alien patrol emerged out of the morning haze, tall and armored and carrying weapons that hummed with blue energy, everyone at the gate paused. One of the gate guards lowered his coffee slowly. Wilcox squinted at the approaching force and said, "Nope." The aliens broadcast a surrender demand in broken English. "Human military installation, stand down, compliance ensures limited casualties." Silence. Then Specialist Boone, who had arrived on a fuel truck because nobody had stopped him, looked at Wilcox and said, "First Sergeant, is this a training exercise?" Wilcox replied, "If it is, I'm failing everybody." Then the lead alien fired. He killed the MP truck. Not a person, the truck. The plasma bolt hit center mass on the engine block and turned the front half of the vehicle into molten wreckage. Wilcox stared at the burning ruin for 1 full second. Then, with a level of personal offense rarely seen outside tax audits and divorce court, he said, "They shot my truck." Boone later swore that the entire fight changed tone at that exact moment. Not fear, offense. The soldiers did not charge gloriously. They reacted like mechanics whose favorite wrench had just been stolen. Someone threw a road flare. Somebody else rolled a tire jack handle like a club. A private from Transportation Battalion ran one alien over with a forklift before anyone thought to stop him. The gate guards finally opened fire properly. Wilcox grabbed Boone by the vest, shoved him behind concrete, and yelled, "If you die before breakfast, I'm writing you up." The alien patrol made it maybe 30 meters past the gate. Then more army showed up. That is not a sentence any invading species should ever hear. By 5:10, the post had what Army doctrine would generously describe as a response. Not a clean one. A response. Brigade Command was trying to establish communications while simultaneously learning that orbital invasion was real. Battalion staffs were forming fragments of orders while half their people were still in PT uniforms. Somebody had lost the authentication sheets. Somebody else had found last year's. The entire air defense section was awake, furious, and 1 coffee behind ideal combat performance. But none of that stopped movement. Motor pools came alive. Fuelers rolled. Ammo trucks rolled. Wreckers rolled. Humvees that hadn't started in months somehow started because soldiers screamed at them hard enough. And then, in one of the most important events of the opening invasion, a convoy got lost. This sounds foolish. It was, in fact, catastrophic for the Serekh. A company-sized convoy led by Captain Alan Mercer took a wrong turn when 2 roads got blocked by burning debris and redirected through a cattle range, a maintenance trail, and an old training route that no longer existed on updated maps. What should have been a rear movement became an accidental flanking maneuver that brought 37 Army vehicles directly behind an advancing Serekh assault column. Neither side expected the other. The aliens had perfect formation. The Army convoy had a water buffalo, 2 LMTVs, one recovery vehicle, 3 gun trucks, a lieutenant in a panic, and a chaplain who had refused to stay behind. Captain Ward looked through binoculars at the alien column and said, "Well, that's fortunate." His first sergeant replied, "Sir, this is not where we are supposed to be." Ward kept watching the aliens. "I know, Top, but it's where they're supposed to be." Then the convoy attacked, not with elegance, with volume. A gun truck blasted one alien walker in the side. An LMTV used pure mass and bad intent to knock over an energy pylon. The wrecker, driven by Sergeant Halloran, who had once towed a Bradley while smoking a cigarette and insulting everyone involved, simply accelerated directly into the rear of an alien troop carrier and flipped it into a drainage ditch. The chaplain was later reprimanded for hitting an alien with an entrenching tool. He accepted this in writing. The Army, like all large human institutions, is held together by 3 things: habit, caffeine, and senior enlisted personnel who have seen too much. By sunrise, the Serekh had already destroyed antenna arrays, outer fencing, supply yards, and 2 barracks buildings. On paper, that should have meant escalating chaos. Instead, the post became more dangerous with every hour, because the NCOs took over. Master Sergeant Reeve from Logistics somehow established a functioning resupply point under active bombardment using a whiteboard, profanity, and a folding table. First Sergeant Hall pulled 2 disconnected platoons, 1 EOD team, and 6 cooks into an effective defensive line simply by glaring until they obeyed. Staff Sergeant Morales organized a roaming vehicle hunter pack out of mechanics, recovery crews, and anybody unlucky enough to be standing near the motor pool when he started issuing orders. One young alien analyst later described the human response as tactically irrational but operationally persistent. That was an elegant way of saying the Army kept finding new and creative ways to weaponize being too stubborn to stop. At one point, a squad of Serekh infantry secured a warehouse complex and reported it clear. 10 minutes later, the warehouse door rolled up and a convoy of angry Army mechanics burst out of it in 3 up-armored trucks and 1 illegally modified forklift with welded plate on the front. The lead mechanic on the forklift was heard shouting, "I'm forklift certified, bitches!" This may not have been literally true. Several witnesses insist it was. The result remains the same. The Serekh stopped believing they controlled cleared spaces. Around mid-morning, as the invasion spread across multiple states and the United States military began assembling a national-level response, a secure briefing was held at a command center tied into federal and service-wide networks. Generals, Air Force staff, Navy liaisons, Army planners, Marine representatives. Satellite feeds showed fires, troop movements, coastal landings, and alien formations. The consensus was grim. The eastern seaboard had multiple contact points. Civilian casualties were growing. Several military zones were engaged. The enemy was technologically superior and had achieved surprise on first descent. Then a tired colonel from the installation entered, covered in dust and carrying a handwritten sheet because digital systems were failing every few minutes. He handed the note to the ranking general. The general read it, paused, read it again, then looked up, visibly confused. "What is it?" someone asked. The general lowered the paper slowly. "It says the aliens have been pushed off the east perimeter, the south access road, 3 logistics yards, and the rail spur." Silence. One Air Force officer asked, "By what unit?" The general looked back at the note. He blinked once. "Apparently, transportation, maintenance, military police, and a company that was on weapons qualification." Longer silence. A Navy officer frowned. "That can't be right." The colonel cleared his throat. "There's a second note, sir." The general unfolded it. "What does it say?" asked someone. He looked around the room and said, with obvious reluctance, "Please tell Higher that the soldiers are now asking whether this counts as a recall formation because one of the sergeants says if it's a recall formation, people can't go home after." The room remained completely still. Then one Army general leaned back and muttered, "That actually tracks." The Serekh were prepared for tanks. They were prepared for artillery. They were prepared for aircraft, satellites, cyber attack, and long-range missile response. What they were not prepared for was the lived reality of Army absurdity. They were not prepared for a defensive position held together by sandbags, MRE boxes, concertina wire, and one specialist who insisted the machine gun was temperamental, but clearly loved it more than some relatives. They were not prepared for a platoon continuing to fight after being told to withdraw because nobody had been informed through the correct chain, and therefore the order was dismissed as rumor. They were not prepared for soldiers stealing alien power cells because supply will want these even while under fire. They were not prepared for a sergeant major appearing in the middle of an artillery staging area to ask why anyone thought this was an acceptable place to leave unsecured trash. They were not prepared for dark humor under bombardment. One alien drone captured audio from an Army trench line after a plasma strike collapsed part of the berm. A soldier looked up, covered in dirt, and said, "Well, there goes Monday." It was Thursday. The others laughed anyway. Another captured recording preserved a medic leaning over a wounded soldier and saying, "If you die, I'm going to be real annoyed about the paperwork." The soldier, bleeding heavily, replied, "Roger, Doc." The medic saved him. The aliens never understood why the humans joked when death was close. They mistook it for lack of seriousness. It was the opposite. Humor was how the Army carried weight without letting it crush bone. That made it dangerous in ways their models never predicted. By early afternoon, the invasion force made a desperate attempt to seize a barracks sector and use it as a hardened foothold. This looked promising at first. Concrete structures, interior choke points, defensible lanes, limited approach options. The Serekh secured 2 buildings quickly and reported success. Then the barrack soldiers returned. Now, there is a stereotype in every army that soldiers in the barracks are a particular species of chaos. They are young, undersupervised, underslept, possessed of questionable judgment, and held together by nicotine, bad decisions, and a fierce possessiveness over stolen furniture. The Serekh learned this the hard way. The first counterattack came through the laundry room. The second came through a breach made by a soldier who drove a riding mower with improvised armor directly through a side maintenance partition. The third was led by a group wearing shower shoes, body armor, and expressions of profound insult. An alien lieutenant would later report that the humans fought with the unstable coordination of a riot and the personal fury of a territorial species defending nesting ground. This was accurate. The barracks fight lasted 40 minutes and ended with the Serekh retreating out of a building they had technically captured, only to find the parking lot held by a cluster of soldiers grilling sausage over a burned-out alien scout drone. One of the soldiers looked up and shouted, "Y'all can't have Building 3, we just mopped!" By late afternoon, the alien attack in that sector had stalled, not because the Serekh lacked numbers, because every push inward seemed to hit something worse than the last. If they moved toward the motor pools, mechanics attacked them with vehicles and tools. If they pushed toward logistics, they ran into layered resupply zones defended by furious sergeants. If they took barracks, half-dressed junior soldiers came screaming out of stairwells and laundry rooms. If they tried to bypass the post and strike nearby roads, they ran into convoy elements who treated ambushes like traffic delays. Field Prefect Saul remained in aerial command aboard a low-orbit coordination vessel, listening to reports decay from disciplined battlefield language into something closer to complaint. Warehouse secure? Negative? Warehouse no longer secure. South route blocked by armored vehicles, unknown designation. One appears to be a fuel truck. Human command response remains fragmented but increasingly aggressive. Request clarification on why non-combat support personnel are conducting offensive action. Request clarification on why human forces appear angrier after equipment loss. That last one made Sal stop the playback and listen again. He replayed it twice more. Then a new transmission came in from a ground commander, voice shaking beneath static. "They are using maintenance assets as weapons." Sal answered, "Define maintenance assets." A pause, then, "Everything." That was when he understood what had happened. The Serekh had not landed near a military target. They had landed inside a machine too large and too ugly to recognize itself as one, and now it was waking up. Sal transmitted the order every ground commander had hoped for, and every proud officer would later pretend they had anticipated. Withdraw from direct contact, regroup beyond artillery range, await orbital revision. Some units obeyed. Some never received the message. Some received it and were too busy fighting in motor bays and barracks corridors to act on it. The result looked less like a tactical retreat and more like something trying to crawl out of a wood chipper. From above, the battlefield made no sense. Alien strategists studying the live tactical feed expected to see coherent front lines, disciplined vectors, organized fallback zones. Instead, they saw knots of violence moving unpredictably across the post like brush fire. A convoy that was supposed to be withdrawing turned around and attacked a flanking element because, according to later radio logs, they were already headed that way anyway. An artillery battery displaced, then reappeared on a service road because one gun chief had correctly guessed where the aliens would try to regroup if they had any sense, then added, which they clearly don't. A medevac team under fire stopped to pick up wounded soldiers and, for reasons still debated, also brought back an alien power core because one medic thought intelligence might want it. Helicopters swept over the post while below them soldiers continued doing what the army always did in chaos, asking questions later. The alien command feed captured one extraordinary moment near the eastern maintenance lots. A platoon of Serekh infantry attempted to cut across an open yard and found themselves taking fire from 3 directions. Thermal tagging identified the shooters as 1 squad in a prepared defensive position, 2 mechanics on top of a wrecker, and a cook standing in a truck bed with a rifle and what appeared to be a cigarette still in his mouth. The alien analyst watching the feed asked very quietly, "Are all humans military?" No one answered him, because the question was getting harder to dismiss. At 1732 local time, the Serekh finally reached the moment invading forces fear most, the realization that they were no longer shaping events. They were reacting to them. Field Prefect Sal got the worst of it through voice traffic, not the polished reports, the open channels, half-heard screams, grid references shouted twice and forgotten. An officer demanding support at a building already abandoned 20 minutes earlier. A squad leader screaming that a human vehicle should not be able to do that on one wheel. Another voice insisting that someone had just hit an alien trooper with a folding chair while yelling, "You can't see me!" That last report was initially dismissed. Then 3 more came in. The army, in the Serekh understanding, had ceased to behave like a normal defending military. It was not breaking into isolated formations. It was multiplying through irritation. Every destroyed vehicle, every burned barracks, every dead soldier, every interrupted meal, shower, or maintenance cycle seemed to create more aggression, not less. Sal made the only rational decision left. He ordered the invasion force in that sector off the ground entirely. No more attempts at securing the post. No more urban penetration, no more direct engagement with army elements in the region. Immediate airlift of what remained. It was the right call. It was also too late, because the army was now following them. The last phase of the battle became a pursuit. Serekh dropships lifted from staging zones under fire, while army vehicles chased them across access roads, service routes, and torn-up training land. Helicopters harried the withdrawal. Light infantry pushed close enough to make loading zones lethal. One alien shuttle attempting a low extraction clipped a maintenance gantry and crashed into a fuel point that had been evacuated 6 minutes earlier only because Staff Sergeant Morales had a bad feeling. Captain Alan Ward's convoy appeared again, not where ordered, but where useful, and managed to intercept an alien retreat column by accident for the second time in one day. When told over radio that he was operating outside assigned lanes, Ward reportedly answered, "Roger, we'll continue succeeding outside assigned lanes." By sunset, the Serekh had escaped the region, but only just, and only with enough surviving ships to carry home something worse than casualty numbers. They were carrying understanding. That night, on the smoking edge of the post, the soldiers finally had time to stop moving. Wrecked vehicles burned in the distance. Medics still worked under floodlights. Recovery teams dragged alien equipment into guarded lots. Officers moved through the chaos trying to reconstruct what had happened and in what order. Nobody had the full picture yet, but they had enough. The aliens had attacked. The post had held. And somewhere above them, something hostile had fled Earth carrying a very bad first impression of the U.S. Army. Specialist Boone sat on an ammo crate beside the motor pool with blackened hands and dried blood on one sleeve, staring at the remains of the MP truck. Staff Sergeant Morales came over carrying 2 cups of terrible coffee. He handed one down. Boone accepted it. For a while, they sat in silence. Then Boone asked, "You think they'll come back?" Morales took a drink, grimaced, and stared out toward the dark where the ships had vanished. "Oh, they'll tell stories first." Boone looked at him. "Stories?" Morales nodded. "Every army does." He looked back at the wrecked truck. Then he added with the steady certainty of a man who had seen enough stupidity to recognize when history had just gotten itself started. "And if they're smart, next time they'll send diplomats." He patted Boone on the shoulder as he got up. "I want my truck working within the week."